Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys today. So like it was mentioned, so my name is Mary Wootters. I'm a new faculty member in the computer science and electrical engineering departments. I just showed up in September, and yeah, I'm having tons of fun. So I want to tell you today about lessons from coding theory. I think I must have goofed when I sent the title because the program says lessons on coding theory. But the point of this is I'm going to tell you why you guys should care about coding theory. So lessons from coding theory. Right, so as you can probably guess from the title, this talk is about error-correcting codes. Okay, so you might be thinking, what are error-correcting codes? That is a very good question. So error-correcting codes are tools for protecting data from errors. And so these are classical solutions to problems in communication and storage. And now maybe your memories might be jogging. Oh yeah, I learned about that in school. Shannon and Hamming, they did all this awesome work in the 50s. And now we know how to protect our, our communication, satellite communication, or our storage, hard disks. We know how to protect all this from errors. And this is awesome, very cool. Okay, so now the next thing you might be thinking, and I know that some of you are probably thinking this because this is the thing that I most often am asked when I say that I think about error-correcting codes, is isn't that a solved problem? Like, don't we already know how to do this? What is new in error-correcting code? So lots of people phrase it like, isn't coding theory dead? Is something I'm asked a lot. But so actually, no. There's still plenty of exciting stuff to be done in coding theory. So first, there's old stuff that's still open, which is I have fun thinking about. There's also lots of new applications within communication and storage. So for example, in distributed storage is something that I think about a lot. And sort of the logistics of how do we store stuff in the cloud is really different than how do we store stuff on a hard drive. And the error-correcting codes techniques that you have to pay attention there are really different. But that's not what I want to talk about today, because what I want to talk about today to this audience is that even if you're not interested in communication and storage primarily, I know this is a very diverse audience who's interested in a lot of different things. I guess the point that I want to convey here, the main point of this talk, is this, is that there are lots of applications of coding theory everywhere, and everyone should care about it. Well, I think so. So what I want to do today is try to motivate this, this is not just some obscure classical thing from the 50s. This is something that's actually relevant today in data science and algorithm design. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So let me, with that sort of intro spiel out of the way, let me sort of back up and start again. Here's a common setup. So forget all that about code, storage and communication and all that. Here's a common setup that many of you may have encountered and will encounter in sort of the data science applications. So suppose you have some data, any data, and it's got some structure, right? And we don't really control the structure. It comes from nature. It's just in the problem, right? But we want to take advantage of that structure. Maybe we want to learn stuff about the data. We want to learn stuff about the world. And we want to be able to do this really efficiently. Okay, so let me just throw out a couple of examples. So there are tons and tons. So one example in image processing, for example, in compressed sensing or sparse recovery, if you have some corpus of images, these have a lot of structure. Natural images have structure. For example, if I were to take a wavelet transform, they would become sparse, right? And this makes them amenable to all sorts of really cool and useful computational tools, like in compressed sensing. Another example is in streaming algorithms. So let's say I'm a router. I have extremely limited computational ability, and I just see network traffic flying by. And I want to maybe compute some summary statistics about this. What can I do? So if this were completely arbitrary data, I couldn't do anything. But fortunately, there's some structure there. Maybe some IP addresses show up more often than others, things like that. And we can take advantage of that structure to actually create a pretty concise sketch of what's going on. A third example in high-throughput screening. So suppose I have a whole bunch of people, some of whom have certain genetic markers that I want to test for. And how can I do that efficiently? And here the structure is maybe that not very many people have a particular SNP in their DNA, or also that maybe this is clustered by sort of family relationships, stuff like that. So how can we take advantage of that structure? Similarly, another example in computational biology, DNA is this huge, complicated thing, a lot of structure. How can we take advantage of that to do, for example, de novo sequencing or to process this data? Okay, and so on. I could go on forever. We're all really familiar with seeing these examples at the beginning of talks, right? But the main point here is that we don't control this structure. but we do partially control what happens to the data. Right? We can control how we process it, how we measure it, what algorithms we run on it, stuff like that. Okay. And what I want to talk about now is kind of, let's take this problem. We don't control the structure. We do control what happens to it, and kind of flip it around. Right? Let's look at the other side of the coin. Suppose, just for fun, that we do control the structure, but we don't control what happens to the data. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, so this actually comes up a lot. So for example, in communication and storage. Right? So imagine that I'm a satellite, and I want to send some data to some satellite dish. And this is going to go through the inky blackness of space, and something terrible is going to happen to it, and I have no control over that. But what I do have control over is how I choose to encode this data. And this comes up not just in communication, but basically in anywhere you could imagine where you get to control how you represent your data, and then you're going to release it into the world, and something might happen to it. Okay. And this is where error-correcting codes come in. So error-correcting codes, so I'm going to give a sort of an informal definition, are by design the most advantageous structure you could come up with for a situation like this. So how do I encode communication? How do I encode data to protect it against the unknown and unforeseeable? So these have been used in communication and storage since the 1950s. And there's over half a century now of extremely beautiful work sort of trying to understand this. Okay. So 2 questions. So now we're sort of looping back to the beginning of the talk. So the first question is, haven't we figured that out by now? So spoiler alert, the answer is no. But even so, how about all this other stuff, right? I like flipped the question around, and I said, OK, well, what if we don't control this, or what if we do control the structure but don't control what we do with it? But we started out talking about all these things where we were going the other way, where we don't control the structure, but we do control what we do with it. And so, as mentioned before, OK, so the first point, we don't really have everything figured out. Coding theory and information theory for communication and storage is still a vibrant research area. That's something I work on a lot. But again, what I want to talk about today is sort of this other side of the coin, that lessons from classical coding theory are still relevant today, sort of in a wide variety of these sorts of applications, which are maybe closer to your hearts. So my work, let me just give a high-level overview of the type of stuff that I focus on. So some of this type of stuff, so I work a lot in compressed sensing, streaming algorithms, matrix completion, questions where you have large structured data and you want to learn stuff about it. So how do we design algorithms for doing that? And then also some of this type of stuff. I work on coding theory and information theory, and how do you design schemes for storage and communication. And one thing I'm really excited about right now, this is sort of the message that I want to share with you guys, is the interplay between the two. So both of these are really sort of rich and beautiful literatures, and I think there's a lot of super exciting opportunity for intellectual arbitrage going between them. And this is something that I'm pumped about right now. OK, so I don't have too much time, unfortunately. So I think I have like 7 minutes left. 6 minutes left. So I just want to talk about one example to kind of illustrate this idea. So I'm going to give a couple examples from computational biology, which I've worked on over the past few years. So this is, again, these are just sort of one examples, but this is something that I can say quickly and is the most fun to talk about, I think. So here's one very classical idea in coding theory. Suppose I want to store some files on some hard drive, like this. And I know that something bad is going to happen to it. Maybe the disk is going to degrade, something bad's going to happen. What do I do? So one sort of extremely classical solution is the following. I'm going to identify each of my different files, or more technically, little parts of each of my different files, with low-degree polynomials over some finite field. Okay, so maybe this file A, I'm going to associate to this low-degree polynomial f. And then I'm going to look at this graph here, and that is the thing that I'm going to store. So I'll look at this graph, and I'll say, OK, those are some evaluation points, and that's what I'm going to store on the hard drive. So I take this graph, and I put it on the hard drive. Why might I want to do this? Well, it turns out that the structure of low-degree polynomials here, if I get to come up with this, is really, really useful. So for example, if the disk degrades and something happens, so instead of this nice polynomial, instead I see a few points get perturbed, I see some little wiggles, something happens. There's enough structure there, and we know how to do polynomial interpolation. We know how to do noisy polynomial interpolation. I can recover what was supposed to be there. Right? There's sort of very nice algebraic techniques that allow us to do that, and allow us to do that extremely efficiently. So this is called Reed-Solomon encoding, Reed-Solomon error correction. This has been around since the 60s. This is actually what things like hard drives and CDs use. It's all over the place. And I would argue that this sort of low-degree polynomials are like the most advantageous structure. They have really nice combinatorial properties. They admit really fast algorithms. And they are used all over the place in communication and storage. So other people might disagree on what is the most advantageous structure, but this is my personal opinion. Low-degree polynomials are it. And so the story I sort of want to tell you today is that these things are useful not just in communication and storage. So let's return to just one of those examples that I had before, this high-throughput screening example. Right, so suppose I have all of these people, and a few of them have some SNP in their DNA, and I want to figure out what it is. Right? Or I want to figure out which people have it. And I have some test that I can run that will identify people. So testing each person individually is extremely expensive, prohibitively expensive in a lot of cases. So what can I do? Well, I can pool their genetic samples, and then I can test the pools. And a pool will turn out positive if anybody in the test came out positive. And through this, I'm hoping that I can take lots of people and pool their genetic material into just a few tests and run just a few tests and save money and time that way. And turns out this works. And here's one way to do it, which should look familiar from the previous idea. Right, so basically, I can pool samples according to low-degree polynomials. Right, so imagine that I have these 3 different people, and actually imagine I have many, 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 many different people. I'm only drawing 3 of them. Where am I going to put their samples? So for example, this green person here, I would put them, hard to clicker, but I'd put it in all of the pools that the green line goes through, and that's supposed to be some low-degree polynomial. And the blue person, I'd put his samples in all of the things that the blue line goes through and so on. I do this for tons and tons of people. And why would I do this? So suppose that at the end of the day, only 2 of these people end up testing positive. And all I see is the pattern of tests that come up positive. Right? Well, it turns out that by the magic of algebra, if I see sort of the superposition of a couple of low-degree polynomials, it's reasonably easy to figure out which 2 polynomials they were. So just by doing some polynomial interpolation, by doing some basic algebra, I can figure out which 2 people sort of had the property that I was looking for. So this is not a new idea. This sort of particular polynomial scheme is due to Kautz and Singleton in the 60s, but this is sort of directly inspired by coding theoretic ideas. And it's actually experienced a big resurgence in sort of the past decade or so. So originally it was used for testing syphilis. Syphilis tests became cheap. This wasn't such a big deal anymore. But now for genetic testing, it's come up a bunch. And making it work for modern problems comes with sort of new ideas and new challenges. So I've worked a little bit with Yaniv Ehrlich's lab at Columbia on sort of actually implementing this and dealing with the stuff that actually happens in practice to make this work. So basically the scale of the problems is much larger, and sort of the constraints imposed by biological machinery is make the problem interesting and different. So it can also be used for de novo genome sequencing. This is something else that I've worked on with Stefano Lonardi's lab at UC Riverside. And basically the idea is the same. I want to sequence, let's say, a bunch of chunks of DNA from scratch. That's what de novo means. And one thing I can do is I can put them in my machine, and what comes out is a bunch of reads. And I want to figure out, OK, so where do these reads come from? I want to piece them back together. So this is a problem. It turns out that it's much more efficient to put lots of different chunks in the machine at the same time. And then what comes out is a whole bunch of reads. And you want to know which ones go to what. And again, same idea holds. It's a little more complicated. But if you pool them according to low-degree polynomials, you can use this algebraic structure in order to extremely efficiently reconstruct which reads came from which which chunk of DNA. So that's another example. So I guess the point, I should probably wrap up soon, is to say, in all of these problems, even if you don't control the structure that you're trying to get at, if you do control how you process the data, tricks like this work. And you can take advantage of ideas from error-correcting codes, sort of turn the coin around, to help you in algorithm design problems. So I gave a couple of examples in computational biology, but there are tons of examples of this, not just mine, lots of people. In compressed sensing, group testing, streaming algorithms, here's just a couple of names of people who work on stuff like this. And I think that this is a tool that is largely underappreciated in sort of algorithm design and data science. So I want to use this platform that I have here to proselytize this idea to you guys. And so just to wrap up, I think error correcting codes are cool. They're still an exciting area of research. If you are interested in communication and storage, I'd love to talk about that too. But even if you're not interested in communication, storage, or information theory or anything like that, if you're interested in algorithm design, error correcting codes are still cool and still useful. And I guess that's the message I wanted to say. So thanks, and yeah, please reach out if you want to talk more. Thanks.